Connect with others in the Awaken Therapist community and join us over on Patreon. When you become a member of the Awaken Therapist community, you'll gain access to the exclusive consultation portion of this episode. Find out more at thespirituallyaligned.com. I'm Harmony Kwiker, licensed counselor, author, and visiting instructor at Naropa University, where I teach gestalt therapy. I created this podcast to support therapists in exploring deeper dimensions in their work with clients. You'll notice that in each episode, my guest therapist stays anonymous. This is to preserve the anonymity of the client they present in our case consultation available on Patreon. In this episode of the Awaken Therapist podcast, I talk with a new therapist who's learning how to deepen into the therapeutic process with her clients. We consult about a case where the client has a persistent pattern of internalized shame. I hope you enjoy this episode. How has your work been with clients? How have you liked being a therapist, or what's been challenging for you?
It's been pretty surreal because I didn't think that I would become a therapist. I didn't have this moment where I was like, that's what's meant for me. I just knew that I loved my experience as a client. And I was like, I want to be that person for other people. And yeah, I've been in practice for almost a year. And some days I feel really aligned and grounded. And other days I'm very much scatterbrained and doubting everything. And every day is a little different.
And it sounds like you're really motivated by wanting to offer clients something that was restorative that you were getting from therapy. Is that right?
Yeah. I'm just trying to be as generous as possible with the way I show up, the quality of listening.
What drew you to transpersonal counseling?
I love contemplative practice, meditation, and I would go to a meditation center in Redwood City, and I had enrolled in a graduate school in Oregon, and then I found out about the hybrid program at Naropa. A friend actually told me about it, and she said, like, if spirituality is at all important to you, this would be a good program. The thing that I was passionate about and like really interested in developing a contemplative practice and deepening, I was like, oh, that can actually coincide with my education. Wow. So that was great.
I love that so much. Yeah, to not have spirituality be separate from our learning experience or separate from our work as a clinician. I've really found that over the past 2 decades that I've been doing this work and in this field, the way that people think about and consider spirituality and therapy has changed dramatically. When I was a newer clinician, there was more of a religious connotation and a more caution, like not wanting to bring spirituality into the therapeutic container. I think there's more understanding now that spirituality is something innate within us that actually serves our healing and serves our journey. How have you experienced spirituality in your work with clients?
I mention it in like intake sessions, that's something that I invite and welcome and honor, but it hasn't really explicitly come up. And I know that it's like you kind of just do it with the clients where like they bring that's what they're bringing. Um, but I do feel a little bit somewhat disconnected from that side of things. And I do mindfulness with a lot of clients, so that's also a flavor of it. But yeah, it's kind of rare where it's like this feeling, you know.
I mean, that makes so much sense to me, especially as a newer clinician, like remembering all of the other things in terms of, just reflective listening and listening deeply and tracking the inner conflict or polarity and the wholeness of the story and the wholeness of the client. Like it's a lot to then also sort of recognize where the client is turning away from their innate spirituality. For me, that is the anchor of spirituality in this work is what patterns pull the client away from their innate wisdom, their inherent intelligence, even their organismic self-regulation. And how can I bring more awareness in collaboration with my clients to those patterns in such a way that they can find their way back home to themselves on their own with my support. It's a very delicate, nuanced place.
Yes. I feel like that's even that is a pattern, like maybe they realize something that they do that is actually coming from a place of wisdom, but they're not recognizing it or glossing over it, or the problem saturated narrative is the one that gets the most attention and airtime. And then it's like this, like, oh yeah, I do know how to self-regulate. I don't need another person to do that for me all of the time. But then the following week, it's like it's the same thing. Like there's the disconnection from their wisdom.
Such a part of the human condition
Yes.
to fall asleep to oneself over and over and over again. And one of the things that I find so fascinating about humanity in general is that our patterns are very predictable. They become, habits at such an early age that even though they might occur in different circumstances, they're still very much the same in all of those different circumstances. They might have a slightly different narrative or be put on somebody in a different way. But once we as the clinician learn our clients' patterns, they become very predictable. And the thing that I love about that is that increasing awareness to those patterns over time can really create so much transformation. I've seen clients where they get really frustrated with themselves, where, like, I can't believe I'm still doing this same thing, because they're asleep to it and then they realize they're doing it again. And for me as a clinician, I love that moment because that's a moment of deep recognition of one's patterns, which is necessary to stay awake.
Yeah, I'm curious how you would call attention to that because I'm sometimes I feel the frustration as well, just with like certain patterns. But yeah, how do you contact that moment as a time of like real awareness, and this is a sign that you're in touch with yourself?
There's two things that occur to me, and one is first reflecting how the client seems. So if the client seems frustrated, I'll just reflect that because to me, that's the present moment entry point into coming back home to themselves. So I might just say, you seem really frustrated as you see this pattern. What do you notice in your body? So now we're here in contact in the present moment together. And then I actually invite them to close their eyes and keep looking at the pattern because I want to support them in shifting into their witness, into a more awake, aware state. And I want them to see the pattern as clearly as they possibly can. And then the next step for me is almost always around inviting a client to self-validate, meaning I want them to be able to see that it makes sense to them that they use that pattern. The moment of self-validation is actually a moment of congruence where they're not at conflict with themselves anymore. And so if I say to them, if it's here for you, I just want to invite you to validate this pattern, just letting it know it makes sense to me that you're using the strategy. They spend a moment like really contemplating it. It's a really mindful way to be with oneself and one's inner psychology. I can see their whole system relax and they're like, oh yeah, no, it makes sense to me that I did this. And they're being compassionate with their own humanity.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I'm just writing down some notes as you're talking to. I've kind of noticed how when clients get in a compassionate place, there's also some sadness that goes along with it. And it's just an aspect of self-compassion that, I don't know, maybe doesn't get talked about that much of, yeah, you can be gentle and warm and understanding with yourself. And there's kind of like a background of sadness, maybe, or something in there that's like, it's also really sad that this happened or that this pattern is here. And you can hold both of them.
I find that sadness is often like a tenderness, that grief once it's felt, creates a softening in one's heart. It's like a return to one's heart where they might have been in their pattern and in some form of self-righteousness or judgment or, some other thought that creates separation and illusion of power. And once they really start seeing themselves, they feel that grief and that sadness, and it helps them to open up and return to the wisdom of their heart.
Yeah, I like that. Um, One other thing that I've been thinking about is power. So like power differential and how I always seek to like equalize it as much as possible, but I also I can't just ignore that I'm in a position of power. That doesn't serve the client. So that's something that I struggle with. When to name it, how to name it, especially in a transpersonal or mindfulness context, because it's there. But then there's this also like human to human quality that I love to bring out. Like I like to say when I lose my train of thought, which happens sometimes, I say that out loud just to like humanize myself. Like I don't know everything. I don't have all the answers. I don't know how to articulate this exactly, but I'm trying. Yeah. But then I also have to remember, like, Hadas, you are in a position of power. Don't shy away from it.
I love that you have attention on the power dynamic. And to me, that's really the first step in right use of power is recognizing that there is a power differential. I think that in traditional talk therapy, there's this illusion of the therapist as expert that keeps the dynamic of the therapeutic container very polarized. Because if the therapist is the expert, then what does that make the client? Right? Somebody to be fixed and changed and taught how to be a better version of themselves, which I do not think is my role as a therapist at all. Gestalt is very much about authentic engagement and being in my humanity in the wholeness of who I am, engaging with my client's humanity in the wholeness of who they are. And to honor the sacred boundary where I am a human being who is a therapist in this context, where I'm honoring my client and following them. It's a very specific moment where I believe that the power seat that I have is to redirect the power back to them because so much of this world has told them, give away your power, believe other people are more important than you. For example, I would never begin an experiment without asking the client what they want for themselves, because their desire is the spark of their sovereign will. And their autonomy is the guide to their transformation. And if they're going to leave my office and feel empowered in themselves, then they are going to feel empowered when they sit with me. Although I am facilitating and guiding and directing. I've been told by my students that when I lead a demo, it's hard to know who is following and who is leading because I'm following my client's energy and I'm following their desire while I'm also guiding it. And so it's like this very nuanced dance, like a really good couples dancer, like you don't know who's leading and who's following. I think that that's a really good therapeutic relationship as well.
Yeah, that feels like it's really organic and like the roles aren't so like cut and dry, you know. Yeah. Hmm.
I rarely, if ever, offer advice or even my opinion to a client, even when they ask, because they ask. They want to they want to know what I think. And I would never tell them what I think in lieu of doing therapy. My opinion is not therapy. Therapy is a process by which healing and transformation occur. And so if they ask, I'll say, I have some ideas, but first I'm wondering, what do you think or what's here for you? And then we continue with the therapeutic process. And if it's still there for me at the end, or if they haven't arrived at their own epiphany on their own, then I might share it. But I'm very selective about sharing my opinion with clients.
Yes, I am as well. And it's hard because some of them they think that's what therapy is. I sometimes feel like I'm leaving them like disappointed or like, what do you mean? Like you can't tell me what to do? That's why I came here. So that's always tricky.
But it gets back to your inquiry around power, because the pattern of them looking outside of themselves for the answer is part of what keeps them from living in congruence with the truth of who they are. And so by illuminating that dynamic and not colluding with it, we're serving them in a deeper way.
Yeah, I like that. Can I bring in another topic?
Yeah, of course.
So there's kind of the other side is when I feel totally unmoored, and that's if a client brings in something that I am currently struggling with. It's one of those moments of like, my eyes are pricking with tears and projecting, and it's like I want to tell them like I'm also really nervous about that, or I also don't know, a lot of it has to do with like relationships and finding love and all of that. And so I always have to like steel myself and like really find my seat so I don't bring my stuff into the container. But it's really hard.
Yes. When you say this, the relationship piece is one element of it that I can relate to and I'll speak to. And there's also this sort of greater collective world that we're all existing within, like experiencing similar uncertainties about humanity and the planet. And when a client brings that up, that's also be very alive for us as clinicians. I think that having a reference point to an experience is actually such a gift to our clients. When I was a new clinician, I was also a new mom, and I was desperately looking for somebody to help me with postpartum anxiety. And I couldn't find a clinician who I resonated with. And ultimately, I created a niche for myself in my practice working with maternal mental health because it was something that I was struggling with. And I wanted to support other women and new moms in this very, very new and challenging experience. And there's this way that having a reference point is so important to this work. Like that's part of our humanity of honoring that, yeah, not knowing if you're going to find love or not knowing what's going to happen to the planet, that it makes sense to me that there's insecurity or fear or even an impulse to control or be perfect that might come up. The other important part of that is recognizing that even though we have a reference point, each person has their own unique experience. That my ideas about what it means to find love might not relate to anybody else on the planet. And to just let go of those ideas while also being in the humanity of it. That's sort of the nuance of staying in contact where we're not disrupting contact, like you were saying, with our projections, but also honoring that we do know what that's like to long for love.
Yeah, yeah. I like hearing that having a reference point can make the work more alive. It's just a matter of not being completely uprooted and like just disrupting the session, which I haven't done, but it's just like that moment of like we're in this together kind of thing.
I think that's such a gift to your clients to be in that with them. And I saw you take a breath and come back to yourself and stay in your seat and find out what's true for them and what they're wanting for themselves. And that's how we navigate the contact boundary, where we don't go over to their world and put our ideas onto them, where we really honor who they are, but also honor who we are. I believe that clients find us because there's some resonance. Like if you didn't have that reference point, they probably wouldn't resonate with you. And that resonance is really important to creating the safety of the container.
Yeah, that topic of resonance is interesting because I feel it with some clients, but not all. I always wonder about how they're feeling about the therapeutic rapport. And I get the sense that one of my clients is just really bored in session all the time, and really tired. And we do meet at 8:30 in the morning. So I wonder if that impacts her. But yeah, it's just the level of resonance is like it varies depending on the person, I think.
Sometimes when the client is in hypoarousal, it can be harder to find resonance with them because then there's just a lot of flatness in the space if we're both in that fatigue and flatness together. And so it can be helpful to look within them for their polarity, meaning if they're very flat, where is their spark of life, their spark of desire? What do they want for themselves? And that can start to create more of a dynamic energy within them for you to meet them at. Listening to real life clinical examples is a wonderful way to increase awareness of how to approach your work from this powerful modality. To listen to the full episode where my guest and I consult about a challenging case, join us on Patreon. This is intended for educational purposes only, and the content here should not be taken as advice or clinical supervision. Find out more at thespirituallyaligned.com. If you want to learn more about the art of transpersonal counseling, check out the Awakened Therapist Signature course at thespirituallyaligned.com. This is a go-at-your-own-pace course with non-contact recorded webinars, demos, practices, and PDF handouts where you can learn more about spirituality, consciousness, and subtle energy through the lens of Gestalt therapy. To learn more, check out our trainings at thespirituallyaligned.com and receive your course today sent directly to your inbox.